Chapter 4. Bring on the Night. Despite having been in Ponyville for most of the 2 years, Dry Rose had never gone for a late afternoon stroll through the famous Evertree Forest before. After all, the forest had a certain reputation, and a pony in the forest supposedly had a lifespan similar to a cupcake, around Pinkie Pie. Still, Fluttershy of all ponies suggested it. He had considered that the trip to Zecora the zebra's house must have not been that dangerous. Now that he was strolling at a rather brisk pace through the dark forest, he was having second thoughts. After all, Fluttershy was the pony who supposedly had a grizzly bear for a pet. So what she considered perfectly safe could easily be very not safe for a young and juicy stallion with enough meat on his bones to make steaks for several of the forest's carnivores' Desians. Even worse, the trip was stretching out into a far longer walk than he had anticipated, even to the point that he had worried about having walked past the zebra's forest house. And he blinked, looking at the carved wooden mast and glass planks hanging from a low and imitating tree. It had to be Zecora's house, because the path was flat-ended in front of it, much as if the tree had a habit of luring young and tender stallions in from town and eating them. Dry Rose swallowed once, looking to the either side for perhaps a slightly less imitating house tree, then back over his shoulder at the dark forest path he had taken to get this far. There was quite a bit of afternoon left, so there was no real need for haste. Even though it was fairly dark under the forest canopy, and strange noises continued to float through the air. Okay, so that's Zecora's house. I suppose I'll just wait out here. The mournful howling of a timber wolf sounded far away, but still far too close. Or in there. Finished Dry before a brisk dash over to the creepy house and a sharp knock on the door. And another more rapid series of knocks, while the howling seemed to come closer. Ah! Sounded a voice right behind Dry Rose's ear, just as he had turned to look back over his shoulder. So, you are the stallion of Twilight's desire. Come in, young one, and sit by my fire. He turned abruptly, finding himself nose to nose with the striped zebra. It was quite a shock, since he had only seen her across the street or other distances before. At this close range, he could not help but notice the thick golden earrings and heavy neck rings, as well as vaguely chemical odor wafting out of the doorway behind her, that clashed something terrible with the familiar scent of alfalfa, mostly like from the early dinner he could see sitting on a table behind her. Pinkie wasn't kidding when she said she told every pony, said Dry Rose. Look, I don't want to intrude on your meal, Miss Zecora. I just need a place to meet Miss Twilight for a few minutes and explain the situation between us. He passed trying to come up with a better description and failing badly. Whatever it is. The zebra's sparkling eyes were very distracting, giving Dry the impression that she knew a lot more about the situation than he was comfortable with telling her in the first place. She cocked an eyebrow under a faint smirk before responding, If you seek to avoid a royal hassle, why not meet Twilight in her castle? Because every pony in Ponyville would see, and they think that we were... Dry cut off abruptly and looked around the small room, just in case Twilight had arrived first. Doing something, he added in a lower voice. Zecora nodded. Come in, come in. A quandary indeed, most handsome steed, not to draw attention as you meet. With your mare you seek privacy where ponies will not stare. Exactly, said Dry, and in verse. So while we're waiting on Twilight, his eyes drifted sideways to look at the big iron pot, which took up most of the center of the main room. What are you doing? Brewing. No, said Dry. I mean, what's in the pot? Be careful, said Zecora as he reached out with one hoof. It's hot. Obediently, Dry Rose returned to a spot out of reach from the simmering pot and tried to figure out why suddenly everything was rumming when everything Zebra was not talking. I'm sorry, Mrs. Cora. I know how upset I'd be if some pony wandered into my store and messed with my coffee equipment. It seemed to be the correct response because the zebra chuckled under her breath and stirred the pot several times before speaking again. Do not feel sorry, but glad that you see. Speak less of your faults and more of coffee. At first, Dry Rose thought his wife from Princess Twilight Sparkle was going to be boring, but it turned out Zecora was just intrigued by the interplay of the organic materials in liquid form. smart as he was. He wound up spending several hours talking with the friendly Zerva and exchanging enough brewing tips between them. Well, it was probably a bad idea to try them out on his customers, and he suspected some of Zikora's potions she made after today might keep ponies awake more than usual. It was so interesting. In fact, that Dry Rose did not realize how close the sun was to setting, and nearly sprinted down the path to get back to Ponyville before dark. It made a very short night's sleep before the next morning. When Applejack came into the coffee shop at her usual time, she found Dry Rose yawning behind the counter with a hefty foamed cup of coffee by his side. He looked up, blinked twice, and gave a tired grunt. "Oh, it's you." "You look terrible," said Applejack. "Were you and Twilight up all—" "No." Dry Rose yawned and tried to focus. "I mean, I didn't see her yesterday. Fluttershy volunteered to run a message over to her, and I went to Zikora's house, so we could have a nice private meeting away from prying ears. She didn't show." He waved a hoof in a vague gesture out of the window where a few Ponyville residents were undoubtedly stumbling around in the dark. Applejack did not seem to believe him and snorted, in derision, "Well, of course she didn't go out to Zikora's. Some oddball young cool who finds kissing you invites you out into the dark forest, and you'll wonder why she didn't show? I've half the mind to drag you over to the back castle one by ear. If you ain't got to the beans to do it yourself, and don't give me that look when you want me to go over to Twice myself this morning. I got a whole day of apple selling in front of me, and I ain't just gonna break it off just to do what you ain't gonna do to never to do." Dry Rose blinked a few times once the confusing word stopped. "Huh?" Applejack sighed. "Coffee. Black. And not as bitter as the one from yesterday. That I could do." Mixing up a coffee for the young mare did help Dry Rose focus, and this time he remembered to give the surreptitious half squirt of apple syrup in the bottom of the foam cup. He floated it out to Applejack with a yawn, and took another drink out of his special Magnum chocolate syrup combo to keep his edge up. "Here you go." "Thanky." The jingle of bits on the counter barely stopped before Applejack added, "So, are you gonna go talk to her today?" "No." He yawned. "I'm beat, and I got to go to bed late, and I didn't sleep very well. I kept dreaming that." Dry Rose looked up with the cheerful ding of the front doorbell, blinked several times, then used his magic to pinch his forelegs while looking back down to the ground. "Sorry, AJ. I must have nodded off there for a second." "Oh, hiya, Princess Luna," said Applejack with a disturbingly cheerful air. "What brings you around these parts in the morning?" Dry Rose looked up. There was no danger of him sleeping now. The Princess of the Night stood silhouette in the Java Lechaza doorway, her star-speckled mane nearly indistinguishable, and the star-strewn night behind her, and her tall statue-hued form presiding over the rest of the customers. Well, customer. Dry Rose had never seen Princess Luna before, although he had a vague recollection of several of his customers talking about her night visit. Supposedly she was a cool princess, completely recovered from her time as a terrifying nightmare moon, and encouraged every pony to simply call her Luna, like some ordinary winged and horned commoner. The expression on her face gave no indication of either beloved acceptance like her sister, or a Magdalene gloating fury like the nightmare, but concealed as much as it revealed. Those cool teal eyes had only taken their calm gaze off Dry Rose for a moment, while she acknowledged Applejack's presence with a brief nod, then returned to his face while she strode purposely forward into his shop and up to his counter, stood an eye to eye in front of him, and spoke in a firm voice. "Good morning, Prophet Harrier. I've heard some fascinating rumors about—" "They're not true," blurted out Dry Rose. "Nothing about them is true. All eyes." One eyebrow on Luna's perfect face raised ever so slightly, and she moved her nose down in order to give Dry Rose a long, skeptical look from beneath hooded eyelids. "So, your coffee is not good as we have heard?" "We sell coffee?" It was all he could think to say, although think was probably not the right word. Princess Luna shook her head slightly, then looked up at the price sheet on the wall. It gave Dry Rose a brief moment to breathe, but his lungs resumed their paralyzed state when she turned back into his eyes. "One medium caramel frappuccino and a large cup with an extra pump of frap brills, double shot frappuccino, and caramel drizzle." Dry just stood and stared. "The poor mood said, please." added Princess Luna, somehow sounding totally calm despite the hammering of Dry Rose's heartbeat in his ears. With a sudden burst of emotion, Dry Rose turned to the coffee machine, taking a refuge in routine pouring and mixing as activities to prevent any additional mental thought. By the time he had finished the order, he was feeling a little more relaxed. Certainly Princess Luna had merely heard about his store from his reputation, and Twilight Sparkle's nocturnal jaunts had nothing to do with her visit. Fool. He slid the foam container onto the counter with a practiced flair and smiled. That'll be 12 bits, please. Princess Luna did not move, other than to continue staring into his eyes. After a brief moment, to damp down his minor panic, Dry Rose gave the foam cup a little push in her direction. Unless you've forgotten your money, in which case I could put it on the table. Princess Luna did not seem to notice, but continued her evaluating stare. Once he was quite certain that the Princess of the Night was not going to speak first, Dry Rose has entirely cleared his throat and asked, "What are you doing?" "I am endeavoring to understand why my friend considers you to be an enticing romantic suitor." The foam container of the coffee rose up in Princess Luna's soft blue magic, and she took a small sip, not taking her eyes off Dry Rose for a moment. A glitter of twinkling stars ran down her neck while she raised one eyebrow, then took another, much longer drink. "Other than your obvious skill." Dry Rose remained silent and his jaw clenched and sweat trickling down the back of his neck, but he nearly jumped out of his shoes when Applejack suggested, "You could just go ask her, Luna." "No?" squeaked Dry Rose once he could breathe once again, but it did not seem to stop the Dark Princess, who simply nodded and turned for the door with her coffee floating along beside her. "Admire your suggestion, friend Applejack. Good morn, Dry Roast." The jingle of the cheerful little bells over the door shocked Dry Rose out of his trance, and after a brief glance out of the large glass windows, he gave a brief prayer of thankfulness about how the citizens of the town were all curious and nosy during the day, but none of them just happened to be up at this hour to snoop around the store. Despite the potential to hit his profits, Dry wished that they were all preferred to sleep in until after dawn, was at least in the general vicinity. Taking a deep breath, Dry Rose moved to the sweep to the custom pile of bits into his cash box, but stopped at the absence of the familiar weight. "She didn't pay," he murmured, in shocked realization, looking down at the empty counter. "I've got it," called Applejack, spilling the card bits down on the counter. "What's it at, twice price? I just hope Princess Luna could wake up twice. She sleeps like a rock in the morning." Through a vigilant effort and lessons. At his meditation practice, Dry Rose had almost managed to get the image of the beautiful Princess Luna standing in the doorway of his coffee shop out of his mind by the time the morning sun had risen far up into the sky and business. By the time the morning sun had risen far up into the sky and business had calmed down to the pre-lunch lull. He should have known better. The cheerful ding of the doorbell preceded the same Princess of the Night as she strolled through and the waiting customers and into the store, only looking somewhat rumpled in the bright morning sunshine and carrying an unexpected burden in her magic. It took a few moments for Dry Rose to recognize Princess Twilight Sparkle, mostly because he was used to seeing her right side up instead of being carried by her tail like some sort of slumbering apollyon with her tangled mane dribbled around her face and her limbs waving aimlessly with every step Princess Luna took. It seemed impossible for Twilight Sparkle to be sleeping in that intensely, uncomfortably fashion, but her snores were unmistakable and quite loud, even though she was also sopping wet and dripping a small puddle on the tile floor. "Coffee," said Princess Luna in front of the counter, which shocked Dry Rose out of his stunned trance. "Huh?" As response went, it was somewhat lacking, but it was the only thing that came to Dry Rose's empty mind. A look of moderate irritation crossed Luna's expressive face, but not anger. Dry got the subtle feeling he really would not like the way she would look when enraged or even slightly peeved. "My fellow princess does not wish to be awakened and greet my sister's glorious day despite my most sincere efforts, including being dunked in the bathtub. We wish thee to prepare her one of the beverages so that she might awaken and be a much more suitable conversational partner." "Oh," said Dry Rose. "Coffee coming right up." He stirred and poured while Twilight slumbered in her upside-down position, with wings drooping almost to the ground. It looked uncomfortable, but not as uncomfortable as Dry felt with the royal eye of Luna on him while he worked. When done, he presented the smaller than he was used to form of frothy frappuccino, since it was her drink for Fridays, spiced and flavors roughly as she had normally requested, and stood back just in case. Luna took the coffee in her magic and waved the open container under the slumbering princess' nose. There was no response, even though she had held it close enough to nearly dunk her nose into the liquid. After flowing the coffee away from the junior princess, Luna took a sniff for herself and a small sip, which made her ears perk up and a subdued wave of light flowed down her glowing mane, ending a few small flashes which could have been miniature supernovas. It certainly seems something to wake her. She cast a curious look at Dryrose, who felt compelled to reply. Maybe if you weren't holding her by the tail? Luna seemed to consider the question worthy and placed the slumbering princess on the tile floor of the coffee shop, where Twilight promptly curled up much like a cat with her head resting on her tail. It made the surrounding customers, because there were few still in the store, all in a simulated daw of adoringness. Continence. The scene would have been unbearably cute even if Pinkie Pie had not immediately darted in front of the door of the store. She laid a series of orange cones around Twilight and put it up the sign, reading, "Cautious, sleeping princess," then winked at Dry and slipped out the door. Luna was baffled. Dryrose shrugged. Pinkie Pie! After taking a long breath, Luna looked back down at the sleeping princess, who had somehow or other managed to find a book somewhere to curl up around. Luna shook her head and sighed. I don't know how she does it. She's just so cute. Yeah, agreed Dryrose, but backtracked almost immediately afterward. Not that I like watching Princess Twilight sleep, or ever have. Perhaps I'm doing this wrong. Luna floated the small foam container over to Dryrose. You try. It did not seem very dangerous because Twilight Sparkle had not reacted at all to Luna's attempt at caffeination, so Dryrose moved it on to the counter, picked up the coffee, and held it up close to Twilight Sparkle's nose. He really should have known better or noticed the way her nose twitched. Princess Twilight swore a little, and with all the magical strength of a princess in Elkhorn, she grabbed both the coffee and Dryrose in her magic. Thankfully, she was able to tell which was which as she took a long drink out of the small foam cup, and Dryrose found himself unconsciously licking his lips over what he knew was coming next. And it did. Thankfully, he did not lose his balance when dragged into the passionate lip lock, but the rest of the world seemed baggy and fuzzy for a while, and it took a few breaths afterwards for his breathing exercises to kick in. Once he could see clearly again, he noticed a dry, empty foam cup rolling away where Twilight where she had curled back up, licking her lips and murmuring, More. He had got up from the floor, returning to his station, taking the large size of the foam container and proceeding to mix, stir, and arrange it so the new cup of coffee was just the way she liked it, then put the plastic lid on top and turned around. All the customers, including Princess Luna, were all staring at him in various degrees of stunned amazement. A few jaws were hanging open. She likes the larger size, he said before clamping his jaw closed on his leaky face and in particular his blabbering mouth. This time he stayed safely on the correct side of the counter, while floating the massive container of coffee down to the slumbering princess, who glommed onto it like a hungry foal, attaching it to a mother, all the way to the faint suckling noises when she made between little snores. It must have been a really late night, explained Dryrose rather weakly. Sweet, sweet chocolate, murmured Twilight in the resulting silence. With sudden awareness of his own dark and possibly could be mistaken for chocolate-colored mane, Dryrose looked nervously around the store while all of the eyes looking back in his direction were most likely thinking the same thought. Luna took a long pace forward and examined his mane. In close detail, her tall form and long neck along the alcorn reached across the counter far more than Dryrose expected. Really, it don't look like somewhat like chocolate. She took a small and unsettling sniff under his quivering ear, which caused goose pimples to run up and down his rump. The smell is not displeasing. I could issue a local receipt. With one last longer sniff, Luna let out her breath in a sigh and moved her overly inquisitive nose back into the customer side of the counter. We shall take thy sleeping princess back to her castle, to await her fair prince's awakening kiss. Preparator those shall attend us when thy duties are done for the day. There was a faint shimmer of dark blue magic, and both princesses vanished, although the faint scent of jasmine that had lingered around the princess of the night remained in the vicinity as if ensured Dryrose would not forget his unaccompanied summons. He turned to the rest of the ponies in the coffee shop and attempted a confident smile. Free coffee for life if none of you talk about this. Every single pony shook their heads no with great vigor, including a few that were dry, thought that were taking notes. Oh well, he shrugged. No harm trying. And after work, I'm dying. Here's an author's note. Editor comments, Mitch H. Oh, it is a poor zebra indeed. It is not who enters a simple instant to a sleeping draught. Anywho, hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you actually liked it, give it a thumbs up, comment down, and be sure to subscribe. Also, I could definitely tell I'm starting to get more used to the reading, which I'm starting to read a little bit more faster and start not making more mistakes, which I can definitely tell that. But still, I kind of like what I'm doing, which I can definitely tell, but still. We have about 3 more chapters to go before we're done.